When you're a small child in a big world, safety is everything. There isn't much you can do for yourself. You have to rely on others to protect you, and it hurts when someone that is supposed to take care of you ends up being the one that causes pain. Early on perceptions are formed about how the world works and who you can trust. Once in a while, those perceptions have to change or grow to make way for new ideas. Let me tell you about how my outlook changed one day when I was younger. Gray swollen clouds canopied the skies. The smell of rain hung in the air. Dad was driving. I was in the back seat, snug and warm, with the feeling that all was right in the world. It had been a dramatic last couple of months for me. My mom, who had turned into a drug user, abuser, and all-around not nice person, had finally lost custody. Bruises on my arms and legs that she had left were about gone, and the nightmares had decreased in consistency. Things that she had said and did still haunted me, but when I was with my dad, I knew that she would never be able to hurt me again. Mom had gotten hooked on prescription pills. She would beat me often, screaming at the top of her lungs that she would smack the monster out of me. Her and Dad had had a good relationship from what I remembered, until after one night my dad ended up in the emergency room covered in what doctors told us were dog bites and scratches. Everything was fine for a couple of months. Then one time Mom grabbed me in the middle of the night. She was scared, but not a mark was on her. Incoherent words flew from her mouth about how Dad was evil and a beast. It never made sense to me. He had always been gentle, thoughtful, and kind. It was after that she began to pop pills and do mean things to me. They tried to work it out for a bit, but then it all fell apart again. Mom eventually wound up in jail for drug use just a few days before all this happened. The white water tower rose into view as we got closer to my house. Soft jazz music floated out of the speakers and through the air. Rain began to leave streaks on the windows. The gentle swish of windshield wipers added their own melody to the already relaxing music. Only a few more stops to my house, where I would then be able to wrap up in a blanket and watch the storm play out in the comfort of my home. It was at the last red light before we reached our destination. You see, before all this happened, the lines of good and evil were drawn in my young mind already. Dad good, Mom evil. As long as Dad was around, then everything was good. When I was with Mom, then everything was evil. In my brain there was no mixing, it was an absolute. The thought of something bad happening with my dad around, or my dad doing anything wrong, was inconceivable. We were waiting for the light to turn green while a man made his way through the crosswalk. At first it seemed perfectly normal. Even from the back seat, I could make out that he wore a long black trench coat, only his hair and face seemed funny, kind of like plastic. Instead of going straight through the crossing, he turned and walked towards us when he was about halfway through. When he did, it was easy to see that he was in fact wearing a mask. At the time, I didn't know it, but it was a Richard Nixon mask. All that I knew back then was that the nose was incredibly long and the features were freakish to say the least. Dad locked the door. Figured he sensed something wasn't right even before I had. The man continued towards us. Dad hit the gas in an attempt to escape, but the traffic on the cross street was too much. He didn't want to get into a car accident and hurt someone else, I suppose. He slammed on the brakes. The man ran to my dad's car door. An SUV pulled up behind us, effectively blocking our retreat. Another man jumped out of the silver Bronco. He wore a Ronald Reagan mask and a trench coat as well. He came up on my side. The Nixon man cocked his head at an angle, then revealed a shotgun from under his jacket. Figuring it was only a carjacking, Dad told me to unbuckle and get out. We didn't live in a large city. That kind of illegal activity was never heard of there. I did as my dad told me, but the man on my side opened the door and shoved me over. Nixon man opened my dad's side and told him to move. It wasn't a carjacking, it was a kidnapping. The SUV behind us backed up. We did the same. They began to drive us out of town through the back roads. Rain now came down in steady sheets. It was hard to figure out where we were going. My only reassurance was that I was still with my dad. As long as he was there, then he would handle everything. They drove us a long ways out of town. In silence, we sat there the whole time. My dad had tried to ask questions at first. They were answered when Nixon man pointed the gun in my dad's face. Final rays of the sun peeked out from behind the rain clouds by the time we pulled up to an old cabin out in the woods. Lights were on. They shined through the dirty windows of the log hut. Shadows of other people were cast onto the drapes that covered them. A couple of other men came out to help escort my dad and I inside the cabin. Our feet squished into the mud that had been made by the recent rainfall. Twigs and rocks scraped together under us. No one said a word. They brought us inside and sat us down on old wooden chairs. Each of the men had eerie masks on. Besides the two presidents, there was a Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, clown, doll face, and a nun. Rope quickly bound our legs and feet. I kept looking at my dad for any signs of reassurance. His stoic face never made a tell that we were in any real trouble. From my understanding, Dad was used to danger. It came with his job of being a police detective. By this point, he had been on the force for 10 years already, and had seen enough to make most men wish for retirement. If not from the job, then from life. That's why we had moved to the town we were in. When Mom started to develop a problem, he thought a smaller town would be a way to keep her out of trouble. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and unfortunately, trouble had found us. Santa took over once we were all strapped in. "Detective Donovan, good to meet you," Santa said while he pulled up a chair. "Recently, a shipment of drugs was stopped on the highway just outside of town. Do you know how embarrassing it is for our syndicate to have over $1 million worth of product get caught in a podunk backwater shit town like this? We're from New York and have connections with every law enforcement agency there. But some little hard-ass cop from the middle of nowhere is holding us up. It don't look good on us, and it ain't good for business." My father wasn't even paying attention to the man. His eyes were firmly fixed on the window and the growing darkness outside. "Hey, tough guy, look at me when I talk to yous," Santa demanded. Dad slowly turned his head to face him. "We's heard you be like this. No one in your department wanted to deal with us until you were on board. He'd go straight to the feds, they said. A real do-right asshole. You're not the most popular person, you know that? Even arrested his own wife for using." "Dad? You told me someone else found out and arrested her," I exclaimed. "Son, don't listen to him. He's making things up. I know this type. He'll try to divide us and use you against me." A new song came on the radio. This one was a slow, melancholy melody from some crooner long since out of style. "Swear to God, son, I'm not making this up. Your old man turned on your mother, sold her down the river, didn't even get her into rehab. Who's to say he wouldn't do the same to you? Makes me wonder what other secrets he's hiding." "I was trying to protect you," Dad said to me. "Tells you what? You give the order to release my shipment, and I'll let you twos go have a real man-to-man to work all this out." I'll never forget the look on my dad's face. When he turned to the Santa man, fire burned behind his fierce brown eyes, fanned by the winds of an approaching storm. "You won't live long enough to get your goods," Dad said to the man. The music changed again. This time it was a fast-paced rockabilly tune with a driving backbeat. A long howl bellowed from my father's mouth, one that sent shivers down each person in the room. Sweat poured from his forehead, arms enlarged so much that the rope strained and then snapped from the sheer force of his expanding muscles. Hair began to bloom all over his face and body. In horror, I closed my eyes, shocked by his unexpected metamorphosis. Gunshots rang out from all around. In the scuffle, my chair got tipped over. With a thump, my head hit the hardwood floor. Screams and shouts came in rapid succession. The sound of flesh rendered from bone echoed in my ears. Feet stampeded out of the door and off into the distance. Then another howl, this time outside the cabin, was heard. All was silent for what seemed like forever before I worked up the nerve to open my eyes. Blood, guts, and bits of bone were scattered across the room. Santa's severed head was not but a few inches from me. I laid there, paralyzed for a moment, then a horrific high-pitched scream erupted from deep inside. Frantically, I wriggled against my restraints. Cuts formed on my wrists and ankles where they had been tied up, but nothing seemed to work me loose. I rolled around for a bit. The chair started to fall apart. Finally, the legs came off, which allowed me to straighten up and slip my arms from around the back. With a bit more maneuvering, I was able to thread the needle and begin to untie myself. Once free, I ran to the car that we had arrived in. Of course, there were no keys, so I locked the door and hid the best I could. In between the front and back seats, I stretched out to settle in and wait. Not even 5 minutes later, the door burst open and in came the Nixon man. He was panting and swearing, clearly distraught. He fumbled to put the keys into the ignition. In that instant, I bolted from the back seat out into the woods. He must have seen me because he gave chase. "Get back here, you little punk," he yelled after me. Unfazed, I continued to run until I tripped over a root. My jaw crashed into the mud. Footsteps approached quickly, so I hid behind a large oak tree. "Where are you?" Nixon asked. A fast peek around the tree showed that he had a knife drawn. He went from bush to bush, thrusting the knife into them blindly. "Your dad, he's a real monster. Come out, kid, and we can both get out of here." From the actions I saw, I didn't believe him to be sincere. He was getting closer. It was then that I decided to run again, before he found me. "There you are, you little shithead. I'm gonna make you pay for what your dad did to my friends. Then I'm gonna use you to make him give up." It must have been about 100 yards before I fell down a ravine. A snap was heard when I hit the bottom. Thinking it was only a twig, I tried to stand, but soon realized the snap had been my ankle. I yelled out in pain, then my hand covered my mouth to muffle the scream. "Oh, little baby hurt himself. Don't worry, kid. The pain won't last long before I put you out of your misery," Nixon said into the night. He still didn't know where I went, judging from the direction of his voice. Painfully, I crawled behind a large rock. My breath sounded like cannon fire to my ears, and my heart beat like a drum solo. Intermittent footsteps, yells, and howls could be heard from all around. However many were left, they were being hunted down systematically. After a bit, I decided to peek over the rock to see if that side was clear. Just as my head poked over the stone edge, they were met by the eyes of Nixon. I jumped back with a start and landed flat on my back. "Boo," he said. Knife gripped tightly in his right hand, he began to approach me. I tried to backpedal, but my ankle cried out in protest. Like a deer in the headlights, all I could do was lay there panting rapidly, prepared for the end. His arm pulled back, ready to lunge at me. The moment he moved forward, a dark, shaggy-haired figure leapt over me. Blood spurted high into the air. Not even a scream left the throat of Nixon, but an audible snap of his neck was heard. The hairy creature gave a quick look back at me, then bounded back into the darkness of the night to continue his killing spree. Cold spread down to my soul at the sight of Nixon's lifeless body. Racked with pain and exhaustion, my head collapsed back onto the dirt. As I stared off at the stars above me, my vision faded to black. When I awoke, I was back in the car that had brought us to the cabin. The rain left streaks on the window. Quiet jazz played on the radio. My father was back in the driver's seat. My ankle had a splint on it that relieved some of the discomfort. "Hey, champ, why don't you get some more rest? We're almost home," Dad said to me. What I realized that day is that even though bad is bad and good is good, sometimes good has to do bad to make sure things stay good. It took some time to really digest that, and of course me and my old man had to have many talks. But it was the start of a new way of thinking. One thing that never changed, though, was that my father always kept me safe. Alright, thanks for watching. This week's shoutout goes to Things That Go Bump. He got the reference from last week's video. It was Nirvana's heart-shaped box. Cool. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And I'll see you next time. Bye.